People are very sensitive. Let's go to Starrcade 83.
So this is the first quote-unquote pay-per-view on the WWE Network. You start it, and there's no graphics, there's no intros, there's no music. There's 4 dudes in the ring, and suddenly a bell rings and they start wrestling. The announcers tell us...
Let me talk about Gordon Solie. Mm-hmm. Gordon Solie is a legend. He was out to lunch when this show started. They bring in the Assassins with Paul Jones and their opponents. And Gordon Solie says, we've got the Assassins, as well as Rufus R. Jones and... That's it. He just stopped. He could not remember Bugsy McGraw's name. And then he said, later tonight, Tony Schiavone will be doing interviews backstage.
Tony Schiavone.
That's what he kept
That
calling
should have
him
been his name.
over and over again all night.
Tony Schiavone.
Tony Schiavone backstage.
I like when he said Bugsy McGraw had a degree from Purdue University. I think it was Purdue University.
Well, he had a degree from somewhere.
Some college in Indiana or something.
He had a degree in being weird.
So, yeah, I don't know if I can describe Bugsy McGraw or compare him to anyone in present day.
No, you can't. He was like... There was a thing back then. Charlie Brown from out of town.
We'll get to Charlie Brown from out of town.
Who was very similar to Jimmy Valiant.
I have the same impression.
Jimmy Valiant, Dusty Rhodes, Charlie Brown, Rufus R. Jones, and Bugsy McGraw.
Both of them.
All like to wiggle themselves, and their knees would...
They do not the Charleston. There's a name for that dance. The knee-knocking thing.
The knee-knocking. Yeah. It was just a thing.
Well,
everybody, all the baby faces did it.
There was lots of, they hit the ring, they'd be, to get the fans excited, so they'd clap their hands, and they'd jump up and down, and they'd do a little dance, whatever they did. And McGraw did all of that, but then he would also stop in the middle of the match and slap the top of his own head, or walk over and make funny faces into the camera for no reason. Now let's talk about his gear. Bugsy McGraw on the biggest show of the year says, what I'm going to do, I'm going to get myself some gray tights. Black stripes down the side, but mostly just gray tights. Very, very tight gray tights, I might add. Too tight. As Craig has said before, I could tell the man's religion. Now, rather than get knee pads and wrestling boots, I'm fairly certain that he paired this with knee-high socks and slippers. It was a strange look.
It was a bad look. It was a bad match.
It was a very bad match.
Bugsy is big and powerful. I will admit, he took the fat assassin and he slammed him, and my mind was blown.
Oh, yeah.
With the ease in which he lifted this man. Now, obviously, the guy goes up for you, but he lifted him up and held him there and walked around and then slammed him.
He had a huge gut, this Bugsy McGraw, but he was also a thick, powerful man.
He was a very powerful man.
Yeah.
Rufus was beyond horrible. These two made the most horrendously hilarious comeback I've ever seen in wrestling. And then Bugsy got cradled and pinned.
Okay, well, first of all, Rufus, to be fair, significantly worse physique than anyone in that UK tournament.
Oh, yeah. I'm not saying that these are the only two men with bad physiques.
Yeah.
Take a look at this match.
This was... But,
this was 1983.
So here's the finish. There's a hot tag and a comeback and a four-way. So the Assassins and Bugsy are in the ring. Bugsy hits a backdrop on one guy, but then the other man hits a schoolboy, and the ref counts 3, and that's the finish. And everyone boos because the Assassins have won. And they go to the announcers who are talking. Now, he was the legal man. He used a legal maneuver. There was no weapon involved, no distraction, no tight pulling, no hair pulling, no feet on the ropes. This was as clean as a sheet finish. But the announcers portrayed it as diabolical. Why? Because he attacked the man from behind.
Yeah. You never fight a man from behind unless you're a coward.
Exactly.
It's old school.
It was a comically bad pro wrestling match. Tony Schiavone was in Ric Flair's dressing room.
God, Tony here. This was only like 3 years before the NWA even watching.
But exactly 3 years.
He hadn't grown his mustache yet.
He hadn't grown his mustache.
And he looked like maybe 19.
I believe
he looked so young.
I believe he got his haircut from a Lego guy.
But goddamn, he was great.
What's funny is he wasn't even doing an interview. He was just talking. And backstage, Flair's there talking to Piper and other baby faces like Ricky Steamboat and Charlie Brown, who just walks by in his mask. There's the babyface locker room. They're all hanging out together. Johnny Weaver and Scott McGee versus Kevin Sullivan and Mark Lewin.
It's funny because Mark Lewin's in there, and I'm like, oh my God, he's got to be ancient. And then I looked it up, and he started wrestling in 1953.
Mark Lewin?
Yep. And I went, oh my God. And then I remembered, well, it's 83.
So it's 30.
It wasn't quite. Well, here's the thing. He debuted in 53, and honest to God, the last time he was in the ring in a match was in 2003.
See, that's more impressive.
He wrestled over 50 years.
I'm only 41.
I was going to say. Big, strong dude.
I have heard of him before. I don't think I've ever seen him. What a yoked man.
Oh, yeah.
Just a big, kind of built like Sheamus, but more just old school strongman style, not bodybuilder. But he's big, huge chest, giant shoulders. He's a top heavy build. But God, big.
And Scott McGee in this match, it's kind of like, he kind of was like a jobber in this match.
Basically.
This guy had been feuding over the world title with Ric Flair and Harley Race a year earlier. Never know that watching this match. He's just a fella in there with a big, long-haired Kevin Sullivan, big, jacked-up Mark Lewin, and his partner Johnny Weaver.
Who is a legend and on the decline of his career, we can say here.
He may have already been wrestling for 50 years.
That's quite possible here. So this was a very basic, simple, formulaic tag match, but there was an intensity to this that is missing from almost every tag match you see today. These teams were trying to win and prevent hot tags and get their partner in there, get the fresh man in.
Yeah, but you know what's interesting about it? Nowadays, you watch Raw, and the show's 3 hours long, and they do tag matches with the New Day or whoever, and what do you see in every single match? The old double heat. You get the heat on one guy, he makes the hot tag, that guy runs wild for a while, then you cut him off and you get the heat again. This is not a hard and fast rule, but back in the day, you rarely did the double heat. And when you did do the double heat, it was because the babyfaces were losing. And in fact, on this show, the 2 tag matches we saw with a double heat, the babyfaces lost in both of those matches. And this was one of them.
One of Sully's great lines here was when he said, quote, "Many people have accused Sullivan of being a druid."
Yeah.
He lives in the wood.
Druid.
Worships ancient spirits. So, yes, there was a long heat segment on McGee. Weaver tagged in, hit about 3 moves. They cut him off. Like 2 minutes went by, and they hit a diving knee to the arm and pinned him.
Yep.
There was no... so weird to watch here in 2017. There was no setup for this. There was no tease.
No, they just got him with a move.
Put 5 moves in a row, and after the 5th move, pin him. And that's that. Now, here's where it got weird. Weird's not even the right word. But this had been an intensely fought match, but a clean sporting event. They had both given it their all to win. And afterwards, all hell breaks loose. Teams start brawling. Gary Hart, who's managing the heels, gets in the ring, passes them a spike, like a railroad spike from his boot, and suddenly there is blood everywhere.
Oh my God. We see so little blood nowadays, and I watched this and it was like...
I wanted to call 911.
Face of Death DVD here or something. It's brutal.
There's an emergency in 1983.
Oh my God. Call the cops.
So Angelo Mosca comes in to make the save. In the process, he is also cut in the arm, but he is eventually able to clear the ring. This went from sport to very dark, tragic situation in a hurry. And then just as quickly back to sport.
Barbara Clary. I'll take this one.
Have at it.
They had a blonde with a perm called Barbara Clary, and she was out there with a mic, and she was interviewing the fans. And she says, "What do you think about tonight? Who do you think's going to win the main event?" And she was kind of horrible, but she was so much better than the interview girls nowadays because she was a person. She was this chick named Barbara, and she wanted to know what the fans thought about the show and who they thought was going to win. This was a success.
Sure. There's a lot of things you've seen, and they talk about this I in the 10 minutes of the Monday Night War shows I've seen. They talked about this, and I've heard Various WWE folks talk about this, but they don't like Southern accents.
Kiss my ass with your Southern accents. They're fine.
That's so stupid.
Yeah, these
Bob
are great.
Caudle was great. Jim Ross was great. Lots of great announcers have had Southern accents.
Not to mention how much of your audience is in the fucking South. Just because you live in New York doesn't mean the whole world lives in New York.
Now, I will say, when Barbara Clary asked these fans, how far did y'all drive to get to this show?
Oh, come on. It was awesome. You know why it was awesome? Because I felt like Barbara Clary cared.
All right.
I felt like she really cared to know how far they fucking drove to come to Starrcade. Because that's an important thing back then.
Schiavone was in the heel locker room, interviewing Harley Race and his friends, Greg Valentine and the Briscoes. Not those Briscoes. Race explained that they had all been discussing Ric Flair's shortcomings and weaknesses, and tonight he's going to go after those spots. Carlos Colon versus Abdullah the Butcher. First of all, I forgot to write it down, but somewhere on this show, there's a match about to start, and the ring announcer stops and says, before we begin this match, we want to take this time to acknowledge and honor a 2-time world champion in our crowd, and then the mic goes dead. And they were trying to introduce Dusty Rhodes, but there were huge technical problems. Gordon Solie says, we are experiencing huge technical problems, and they moved on. But I think it was here, but just know that happened at some point in the first part of the show. Now, Carlos Colon and Abdullah the Butcher.
Oh, my God.
They have wrestled 20,000 times. They're all exactly the same. This was one of them.
Yeah. Nothing to add. They claimed the match had been banned in Puerto Rico.
For being too violent, which is awesome.
Abdullah kept hitting him with a gimmick.
10 seconds in, they locked up, and then Abdullah pulled his gimmick out.
Of course.
I know.
And then Colon got the gimmick. Abdullah's bleeding all over the place. Carlos bites the cut and ends up with blood all over his mouth and face.
Oh, yeah.
Dear God. Abby kills the ref with an elbow smash right on the back of the guy's head as he's down. And then I guess Hugo Savinovich.
Wait.
Please clear up this finish.
You left the room momentarily.
I don't know why I thought this would go longer. I thought, I'll leave, I'll come back, it'll still be going.
Going in 10 minutes, yes. No. Colon has the figure 4. There is no ref. At this point, someone hits the ring. And when I say someone, I mean Gordon Solie said, there's somebody in the ring. And then this man hit Colon with something. And Solie said, he's hit Colon with something.
This sounds awesome. I need to go back and watch this.
The man left. Abdullah got on top. The ref counted 3. Only after all this happened did Bob Caudle say, that is Hugo Savinovich. He is Abdullah the Butcher's manager. And now, of course, he is the Spanish commentator.
I love that Gordon Solie's a legend, and Bob Caudle's carrying this particular Starrcade.
This is not Gordon Solie's best night.
No.
Match was horrible in every way.
And then we had the greatest thing I've ever seen.
All right. I need to set this up, right? Schiavone is interviewing Mosca backstage. They're sitting next to each other on a bench, and their backs are to a wall, and the camera zoomed in fairly tightly on just the two of them, okay?
This was Faces of Death.
So Mosca's talking, and his arm is bandaged. There's blood underneath it. He says, yes, I was slashed in the arm by Mark Lewin Spike, but I'll still be there to do my referee duties later. I'm going to be referee for that match. Mark Lewin, I've known you a long time, and I tell you, brother, blood's thicker than water. And he's threatening doom on Mark Lewin. And as he's talking, the camera zooms out, and sitting right next, directly to the left of Angelo Mosca, is the dead body of Scott McGee.
Oh, yeah.
He's sitting. He is not.
No, he's slumped.
He's leaned. He's leaned back against the wall. He's sitting on the bench. He is staring off into space with the one eye we can see because the other eye is matted over with blood. He may or may not be breathing. It's not clear. Blood everywhere.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, everywhere. Coming out of his knees.
This was ridiculous.
There's no doctor carrying to him. There's no. His buddy Angelo Mosca don't give a shit. He's just leaning back against the wall with more blood out of his body than inside of it.
Good God.
This is George Romero stuff right here, man. This is a dead body. This was the undead.
All right, so we got to go ahead here. We got to get moving.
Right.
So, Wahoo and Mark Youngblood against Bob Orton and Dick Slater. So, they do the graphics before the match. Looks like an Atari put it together.
Yes.
So, they have a picture of Wahoo and a picture of Youngblood, and they put them next to each other. But Wahoo's making a mean face, and Youngblood is making a happy face.
Yeah.
But when they put them side to side, it totally looks like Wahoo is mean mugging the guy.
He's staring a hole through his own partner.
So
You young punk.
they get the heat on Youngblood, and then, of course, they try and break his back. Youngblood gets a hot tag. Wahoo runs wild. Then they get the heat on Wahoo. You know what that means? It means that Youngblood ends up getting pinned. All I want to mention about this match, the only thing I want to talk about is, I remember years ago, we were watching probably Classics on Demand, and we're watching an old MSG show, and there's Cowboy Bob Orton. And you were sitting there and you said, how in the world is that Randy Orton's dad? It's funny. People say that, I think, because, number one, Randy's shredded, and his dad was not shredded. But Bob Orton had that 70s afro.
That was a big part of it.
If you would have just shaved his head like Randy, and he would have lost like 15 pounds and done some crunches, they'd fucking be spitting images of each other. They look remarkably, facially, especially as Randy gets older, they really do look a lot alike. It's just one guy had a horrible, horrible hairdo and was a little bit fat. God damn, he was a great worker, though. Holy shit, he was a great worker.
Yeah, no doubt about that. Schiavone interviews Flair, who very quickly just uses his interview time to wish Steamboat and Jay Youngblood luck in their match tonight. So, Jay Youngblood begins to speak, and 60 seconds pass by, and I'm not sure he's used any vowels. He's just mumbled his whole way through. And finally, Ricky Steamboat just steps in. Says, tonight we're going to get our 5th tag team titles from those Briscoes.
On ad, by the way, in that Orton match, Cowboy Bob got the win with a middle rope superplex.
That's right. That was his finish.
Randy always does that top rope suplex, and Randy does that superplex, and he sets it up so well, and he delivers it so well, and he sells it when he lands so well. The place just goes crazy for a superplex in a business where people go for the X-plex and it gets reversed into a Hurricane Rana. They go nuts for that suplex.
Exactly.
Same thing that Randy Orton's father here did in this match. It was great. And then they tried to break Wahoo's arm.
Dicks. So, since the interview with Dusty Rhodes failed earlier, they tried a second time. Barbara went to interview him, and her mic cut out. So we're looking at Dusty and his permed mullet. Think about that. And his yellow sunglasses. And he's pointing and gesturing and lifting his elbow. He's being Dusty Rhodes.
And every now and then you can hear him.
We heard about every 10th word.
Yeah.
But otherwise it's silent. And so Sully delivers the promo for him. So imagine, if you will, Dusty Rhodes being Dusty Rhodes, but you can't hear him. And in the voice you hear instead is, he is challenging the winner of tonight's main event to a world championship match down the line at some other date.
Yeah.
That was funny. It's time for Great Kabuki versus Charlie Brown from out of town.
Charlie Brown, everybody. I hate to reveal spoilers here, but it was my main man, Jimmy Valiant.
I knew it.
Who legit had the greatest job of all time. This match was horrible.
Oh my God, this is awful.
Fun early. There was a great spot where Paul Jones used to do this in the studio shows, but it was done by Gary Hart here. All he had to do was tease that he was going to reach towards Jimmy Valiant, and the place went crazy at the tease of interference. Match totally fell off a cliff. Kabuki applied the
Didn't start that great, by the way.
that jumping claw off the ropes, I think 3 times. This was one of those matches where I watched it and I thought, who the fuck bought that this was real? I mean, seriously. I mean, how?
I don't know.
You guys bought that a guy jumped off the fucking ropes with a claw? An oriental claw, as they called it?
A few times, by the way.
A few times.
They did this repeatedly.
Charlie Brown just made a comeback, hit the boogie elbow and won.
1,000 sleepers, 1,000 claw holds. Valiant had like 2 punches, dodged the shoulder charge, hit the elbow and won. Yes.
You know what's funny is we talk about these finishes and we just kind of gloss over them and blow them off. Every time a babyface won, these people went batshit crazy.
That is true.
They lost their minds.
That is true. All of them. All of these babyfaces. Now, the other part of this is Kabuki's TV title was on the line. So Valiant wins, and everyone goes nuts, and they go to the announcers who say, now we'll have to check to see if this pinfall occurred before the 15-minute time limit to see if Charlie Brown is now the new TV champion. Are you kidding me?
I know. I was like, Nobody had a goddamn watch. Like, what the hell's taking so long? Did he win the fucking title or not?
The announcers interviewed some guy who said Ric Flair would win. We had one last promo segment in Harley Race's locker room, where Orton and Slater talked about collecting a bounty to put Flair on the shelf. Harley Race had paid them to put Flair on the sidelines, and they'd have done it once and for all if Wahoo McDaniel had been there. So tonight they got their revenge on Wahoo by going after his arm. And Race then says he knows he's just going to give out his game plan. He knows Ric Flair's got a bad neck, and tonight he's going to target that neck and put Ric Flair out for good. And that's where we stopped.
Starrcade 83, everybody, on the WWE
Two
Network.
more hours to go.
Oh, man, 2 more hours to go, including that big main event.
We also watched the middle portion of Starrcade 83.
We sure did.
It is much better than the first hour.
Yeah.
Much.
Till the end. Till the second half of the hour, which is a half hour of putting up chain link.
So you recall, in the first hour, Dusty tried not once, but twice to challenge the winner of the main event and was undone both times by technical difficulties. Finally, they just brought him backstage to the interview area. So they had a little backdrop and Barbara with a microphone, and he got to cut his promo, and he held it together, by the way. I had been losing my mind at this point if no one could do anything right, and it took me 3 tries to cut a promo. But he was a pro, pulled it together, talking about what a great match it would be, so he couldn't wait to challenge the winner, get his 3rd world title. He did, by the way, go on record as predicting that Harley Race would win.
Yes, he did.
Greg Valentine versus Roddy Piper in a collar match.
This is a very, very famous match. Everybody talks about the Greg Valentine, Roddy Piper dog collar match.
First time I ever saw it.
This was not a dog collar match. It was a collar match. And then they spent like 5 minutes trying to figure out what the hell to call the thing around the guys' necks. They finally discovered that I guess you could put it around a pit bull. But they had all sorts of weird descriptions of what the thing was around their neck. They called it a collar match.
Yes.
For historical purposes here. Had a neck tug of war.
The thing about this that was so great, think of all the gimmick matches we've seen where they use whatever the gimmick is once and then move on and do a normal wrestling match for 10 minutes.
Yeah.
That didn't happen here.
No.
These two dudes were joined at the neck by a chain, and every single spot they did involved said chain. Almost entirely. There was like a knee lift, a suplex, a sleeper. But most of those two dudes hitting each other with this chain that was here, conveniently to be used as a weapon.
And you know what else was great about it? And you can't really make a comparison to today because today everybody's seen everything. But nowadays, if you've got a stipulation match, the guys go back and they try to decide what wacky creative thing can we do that's never been done before? What kind of contraption can we make? What kind of spot can we do that's new and innovative? These guys had a collar that was around their necks, attached by a chain, and they proceeded to use that chain they whipped each other, they wrapped it around each other's neck, and they wrapped it around each other's face.
Nose, specifically.
And occasionally they pulled each other with it.
Yeah.
That's it. They did basic stuff that if you were having a fight and you happen to be wrapped up with a dog collar, that's the kind of stuff you would do.
Yes.
There was nothing weird like, well, you know, you climb up and I'll yank you, and then you bounce off the top rope and do a flip and then go through a table, which will pull me by the neck over the top rope, and then I'll go through a second table. Yeah. There was nothing like that. There was, you walk that way, I'll pull it, you fall down. Great! And the people were totally into it because everything was totally believable.
Everything's totally believable.
My God, the
everything was
chains
totally
in his mouth.
Serious. No one was joking about this.
No.
This was not fun. This was brutal. So the storyline is that Piper had an ear injury coming into the match. And he ran wild for a bit early, whipping the hell out of Valentine with his chain, until Valentine was able to grab the chain and clunk Piper in the bad ear, and this was trouble. And he kept working the ear throughout the match, working the ear, and Piper started to lose equilibrium. And he gigged his ear, by the way, bleeding from the ear. And he sold that he couldn't get to his feet, not due to pain, not due to exhaustion, just due to dizziness, because his balance was thrown off. And it was awesome. Valentine's bleeding as well. Both is bleeding all over the place. And Piper looked at his... Things were most dire for our hero, Roddy Piper. And they supposedly called Greg Valentine the hammer because of the elbow drops he used. So he's dropping 2 or 3 of these big elbows, and he goes for another one, and Piper's able to dodge. Now, he still can't get his balance, so he tackles Valentine to bring him down to his level, and then beats the piss out of him. We had somewhere in here Gordon Solie suggesting that Valentine might have a concussion, and perhaps the match should be stopped in 1983.
Yeah, 1983. It was crazy. Mm-hmm. I mean, we didn't even know about concussions till the 2000s.
No. So the finish was a thing of beauty. Valentine's working Piper over, can't put him away. He goes up to the middle rope, and he balls up the chain on one fist. But Piper grabs the chain, pulls him down by the neck. As Valentine's coming down, Piper catches him with a shot to the throat. He whips him with the chain as hard as he can, about 6 times. Then he wraps the chain around Valentine's legs to hog tie him and pins him.
It was great.
It was awesome. Now, I did not like the post-match. I will say this.
Well, before we get to the post-match, the match was very, very good, and it's legendary. I mean, it really doesn't hold up. It's a good match in terms of psychology, but, I mean, if you watch this today, there's a lot of matches that, they're legendary matches. You watch them today, they're still great. I mean, as a match, the Briscoes against Ricky Steamboat and Jay Youngblood was way better than this match.
Really? You thought so?
I thought so. It was an actual match. I mean, as a spectacular, as a what'd you even call it? As a spectacle, bloodbath. I mean, this was a very, very good match, but it was very, very basic and simple. And I don't know. It didn't feel like a match that would be talked about. Okay, so when I watched it, I didn't think it would be, how can I say this? When you watch it, you don't think, my God, people have been talking about this for 40 years.
Would you recommend one of our listeners go out of their way to pull this up on the network and watch it?
I guess. If you want to watch a legendary match, I wouldn't say, like, you've got to go back and watch this match.
I would highly recommend it.
You've got to. You just absolutely I wouldn't say that.
Well, anyway, the post-match, which I did not like. So both guys had seconds. Like it was a mask match in Mexico. They were never identified. In fact, they had seconds and thirds. There were 2 guys in each guy's corner.
Sounds like a usual dinner for you.
Haha. So Piper wins. They get the chain off him, and his 2 buddies come in, and they hold him up on their shoulders and start to carry him around the ring. And then Valentine, who has just been through a 20-minute fight, beaten with a goddamn chain, is fine. He hits these guys. He has 1 elbow that somehow wipes out both of Piper's friends. They're gone. We never see them again. He begins to choke Piper with a chain. The ref can't stop him. Valentine's just fine after all this. And eventually he let him go and left. Now, I will say, somewhere in this melee, we did get blood on the camera, which is always a plus. And Piper eventually recovered from the beating and celebrated, and the fans all loved him. Flair cut a promo on Harley Race backstage.
First they go, let's go to Barbara Clary with Ric Flair. They go back, it's Tony Schiavone.
Forgot about that.
Yeah.
Yes.
It's a very, very difficult job.
I can tell the difference between Barbara Clary and Tony Schiavone.
Well, you know what? That's good.
Good.
Because he had such a nicely feathered hairdo and a clean-shaven face that, quite frankly, I think that they looked more similar than Peyton Hoyce and Billy Kay. But that's just me.
So Flair thanks all his friends for taking part in his training and getting him prepared for this match. And Wahoo's there. He says he would bet all his money on Ric Flair winning the title tonight. Barbara Clary interviewed Don Kernodle.
I'll say one thing about Flair. I've mentioned this before watching the old NWA shows, but when Flair is the champion, he is on top of the world, and he's lighthearted, and he's talking about his money and his jet and his women, and he's talking about where the Horsemen are staying. Come meet him at the hotel. He's the happiest guy in the world. When Flair is not the champion, and he's got a title match or an important match coming, this goddamn guy, he's got his gear on, he's got a t-shirt on, there's no comedy, there's no bullshit, there's not one mention of money, of houses, of jets, of anything. It's all about, I'm going to go in there, I got to get the job done, I'm the best athlete in the world, I'm the best wrestler in the world, and I'm going to come out of this the victor. The switch flips with Ric Flair. It is totally different from today. I don't want to harp on the guy, but Dean Ambrose is so mad at Baron Corbin for costing him the championship of the world that when he comes out to challenge Baron Corbin on SmackDown, he's got to start by telling 3 jokes. Because Dean Ambrose's character is wacky. Who the fuck could possibly care about Dean Ambrose when he comes out making fucking jokes? He's so mad he's making jokes? It's stupid.
Barbara Clary interviewed Don Kernodle, who was very believable here, playing a man devoid of charisma.
It was Barbara Clary, too, I can confirm.
Yes. Then we had Jack and Gerald Briscoe versus Ricky Steamboat and Jay Youngblood.
Man, I got some knowledge to drop on this one. This was a great tag team match. The Briscoes were great heel tag team wrestlers. And you know who was a great babyface tag team? Ricky Steamboat and Jay Youngblood. Man, they were great wrestlers in this tag team match. And you know who was a really, really great babyface? Ricky Steamboat.
Let me write that down.
I got to tell you something about what a great babyface this guy was. He's so fucking good. Like, you got to be blind to not see how good Ricky Steamboat is as a babyface. And I think a lot of people watch him and they are blind. I mean, he's so good. Why can't people do this shit anymore? Like, first off, he's a good-looking guy.
Great physique.
Great physique.
We buried the physiques in the first hour of the show. Ricky Steamboat had a great physique.
He has a great physique. He's a handsome guy. He's got a great face. He's got a great face where when he's on fire, like he looks like he's going to beat some ass. But when he's getting beaten on, he can look so sad. He garners such sympathy as he's there selling. You always talk about the Ricky Steamboat rule. Don't take more than a couple of shots before you do something to fight back. Forget all that. Ricky's so good at laying there, and he reaches towards the fans. You know, you see those preachers on TV, and Dusty used to do, he goes, I'm reaching for you. And they reach at the camera like they're reaching towards you. And so you want to reach your hand and grab theirs. That's what Ricky does. Ricky doesn't reach for his fucking corner. I mean, he does. He's trying to get there. But man, he'll be there and he just reaches to, he's just reaching out to the people and they're screaming and they're like, Ricky, I'd grab your hand if I could get to that ring. He's so fucking good. Pains me to watch matches like this. Well, they did everything you're supposed to do in a tag match.
For the first half of this, you had the babyfaces running wild with scientific wrestling for a while. Lots of arm drags, or as so they call them, spin under takedown.
The spin under takedown. Mm-hmm. Got that from Granny.
So the Briscoes were being out-wrestled. So they said, okay, we're going to fight dirty. So one of them takes Steamboat to the corner. Did we mention Angelo Mosca is the special ref?
Yes.
Angelo Mosca is the special ref. I believe it was Gerald is throwing these elbows at Steamboat in the corner, and he won't stop on 5. So Mosca just grabs him, pulls him to the corner. He's taking no shit, this special ref. So eventually they're able to cut off Steamboat for the heat. I think they just kicked him. Nothing fancy. And it's fun watching this heat segment because the Briscoes were a heel tag team, but they still relied mainly on scientific wrestling. File this in their things you would never see in a match in 2017. Steamboat's down selling. Gerald drops behind him, grabs a waist lock, does a neck bridge, and just tries to manhandle his shoulders to the mat. Just try to wrestle him to a victory. And they just did this spot for like 20 seconds. Gerald holding a bridge, trying to hold Steamboat down. And finally he gave up and tried something else.
You know why it's so effective? Because today the bad guys have to just constantly cheat and be rudos. But the whole thing with the Briscoes is they were wrestlers. And they thought that they were the best wrestlers. And so they tried to out-wrestle the babyfaces. But they weren't above cheating a little bit.
When necessary.
Just a little bit. Mm-hmm. Like, they just needed a little bit of an edge. Because they wanted to prove that they were better wrestlers. This psychology is too profound.
So everything was going fine. And then the point I turned in this match, Steamboat is crawling and begging for the hot tag, and as you noted, everyone's behind him because he's the best babyface ever. And he finally dives to the corner, and he tags in Jay, and Jay hits the ring, and 10 seconds later, he has been cut off, and they're beating him up now. And everything just stopped to a halt. Match goes on for a while. Gerald complains about a slow count. I did notice Gerald did almost all the key spots in this. Gerald complains about a slow count. He shoves Mosca.
Bad idea.
Mosca shoves him back. Gerald bumps into Youngblood, knocking him into his own corner so Steamboat can tag in. So Steamboat comes in. They do moves for like 2 minutes. And they pin Gerald and win.
That's right. They got the hot tag. They double-teamed Jerry. They covered him. And the ref counted 3.
Where was Jack?
There was no near fall. There was no save.
It came out of nowhere.
There was no swerve.
There was no climax.
There was
it
no
very anticlimactic.
One guy hits his finish, and then the other guy hits his finish and wins. There was nothing.
I don't need 78 near falls. I don't need every move kicked out of 5 times, but would have been nice to have some build to this. I think I may have actually been looking off screen and heard the ref count 3 and everyone cheered.
You're watching through modern eyes. That's the problem.
I guess so.
The matches are so patterned nowadays that when something non-pattern happens, you're like, what the fuck just happened right there?
That's probably true.
Oh, the good guys out-wrestled the bad guys and pinned them. What a shocking finish.
Now it's time to set up the cage.
Oh, man.
Now, I swear it would have been better if they had just said, folks, we are going to set up the cage and just like put up, or they could have just shown that. People watching at home have never seen a steel cage set up around a wrestling ring. They may have stopped to watch that. Or I've seen shows that just say intermission. So you say, okay, I've been watching this for 2 hours. I'm going to hit the bathroom. I'm going to get another beer, whatever you're doing. Instead, for a while, it was like they tried to hide it. Don't let the people know we're setting up a cage. So they ran the credits.
Yeah, they ran the credits.
Executive producer, lighting director, technical
David
director.
Crockett was listed. My main man.
As they're going over all this, with commentary, by the way. Sully's doing commentary for the credits. Our cameramen today have done a fine job. There's like 2 cameramen on the screen, 2 cameramen's name on the screen. He says, one of them was up above the ring. I'm not sure which one that one was, but he did a fine job as well.
You know, it was funny when you watch all these old NWA shows when they roll the credits. And granted, there was weird stuff like Virgil Runnels being given a credit for whatever he was given a credit for. I forget, but that's Dusty, by the way, everybody. So it is weird that in WWE today, think about all the hardworking people. They got 500 employees.
Yes.
They never get shit.
No.
Like, would it be that hard to run the fucking credits at the end of a WWE Network special and just give these people some credit? That would be awfully nice. But I guess that's old school wrestling. We can't do, even though they're making movies, they don't run credits.
So we go backstage finally. Charlie Brown from out of town cuts a promo.
This was amazing.
He's the new TV champion. He dedicates his TV title window to 3 groups. First, to the people. Believing in Charlie Brown. 2, to Jimmy Valiant. And finally, to himself.
Charlie Brown.
And he leaves. Piper shows up. He's showing off his bad ear, saying, this is all you got, Greg Valentine. I beat you fair and square here at Starrcade 83. This is a non-title match, but now I know I can beat you. I want that U.S. title. And then Youngblood and Steamboat arrive. They've literally just come from the ring celebrating their win. Youngblood was, I think it was worse last week, but
He was a horrible promo.
I've seen him cut. Why did they ever even bother putting a microphone in front of him?
God. It's terrible.
And Steamboat was just there. He's babyface promo. We're happy we won. 5-time champs. We'll fight anyone. Blah, blah, blah. So it's time to go to Gordon Solie and Bob Caudle.
Yeah.
They just
they rambled and they rambled.
had a chat.
And then they go, let's go to Barbara Clary. There's a pause. We're not ready to go to her yet.
Don't.
Rambled some more.
You're underselling this. They rambled a bit. They were on screen for a good 2 minutes before trying to throw it to Barbara and failing.
Talk about the Puerto Rican basin. I can't get over that.
That was where they said, let's throw it to Barbara Cleary. Like 5 seconds pass, they say, okay, we're not ready for Barbara. Gordon, what else is going on? And this is where Gordon brings up the Puerto Rican basin, says hi to everyone watching in Puerto Rico. I hope you enjoyed seeing the match here between Carlos Colon and Abdullah the Butcher that was banned in Puerto Rico. And finally, whatever technical problem they got, it's worked out.
They went back to Barbara. They had to go to Barbara. They had technical difficulties. They would not give up because they had to go back to Barbara Clary for the 4th interview with Dusty Rhodes.
First of all, you've never seen Gordon Solie so happy as when he finally realized they could go to Barbara Clary and he could shut up for a while. Barbara Clary interviews Dusty Rhodes. They've got some women there. Dusty says, ladies, who do you think is going to win the main event? And they all say, Ric Flair! In that voice, by the way. Then they go back to Gordon and Bob.
Now, before we wrap this up, earlier in the show, we talked about the famous dog collar match that, as it turns out, was just called a collar match. Well, here, this Starrcade 83, the famous Flair Race cage match. I think at some point they must have called it a cage, but Gordon Solie gets going, and he just keeps calling it a chain link fence.
Fence match.
We're getting this fence together for the chain link fence match here tonight. They're creating a chain link fence around the ring to keep everybody in and also to keep everybody out. A chain link fence match.
Yes. Now, last thing I want to mention before we call this end this show. They go to interview Barbara and Dusty and the women, and they go back to Gordon and Bob. And Bob, at this point, he can no longer pretend. He's just dropping the charade. He outright says, folks, I'm sure by now you're all wondering why you've been watching the two of us talk for so long. And the answer is, they're setting up the fence.
The chain link fence.
So we were just flapping our gums.
So next
Bob
week,
Connell
everybody,
was great.
So keep in mind, the show is 3 hours and like 55 minutes long. And we watched an hour and 10 minutes last week. And then we watched another 50 minutes this week. And like they're stalling from like the hour and 40 minute. I mean, they stalled for like 20 minutes. And we shut it off. There's 55 minutes of television time left. So I'm not even sure if they're going to go to the cage match next. I mean, we may have another 20 minutes. I think they were just about to start the national anthem. Maybe they're going to do the anthem from all 205 countries or whatever we're at right now. And then they'll actually do the match. But we will conclude soon the famous chain link fence match between Flair and Race, with Dusty getting the winner. All right.
Well, from one legend to another, and by that legend I mean Mark, of course. Starrcade 83 finally doing the main event, November 24th. Ric Flair versus Harley Race in a steel cage match for the NWA World Heavyweight Championship with Gene Kiniski as special ref.
By the way, if you have a song about fucking chickens, you can send it to us. Song in the subject line. Brian at WrestlingObserver.com. We're going to start this up again. We're going to get these songs going.
I endorse this.
Yeah, a lot of requests, so we're going to try and do it again.
So, there are entire matches on Raw these days that start and end faster than Gene Kiniski's instructions to these two men before the bell rang.
Let me say something about Gene. People are just waiting for me to bury this guy. I mean, I can, but there is a spot involving Gene Kiniski near the end of this match where
It's the finish.
Anything that I say about Gene Kiniski, I take back for how this whole fucking thing went down. But the one thing I will say is Gene Kiniski was a pretty horrible referee. I mean, he was kind of historically horrible in this match, but I will give the guy credit. He was horrible because he was, what was that word you came up with earlier?
Pedantic?
He was pedantic
Yes.
in his refereeing. He was taking his job very seriously.
There's a point about a minute in where Flair balls up his fists and Gene steps in, slaps his hands and points and says, "No closed fists."
I think a legitimate shoot referee probably would have been less militant with the rules. They're doing a headlock on the mat early. This is when I first noticed it. Every last single square millimeter of a man's shoulder and entire back had to be absolutely razor flat on the mat, or Gene was not going to count. I was like, you're killing me. Like, I know you're a legend. God bless you. I hope you have a wonderful life and a great family. But you know what? The whole fucking point of a referee is not to be noticed. Like, all I could do was notice Gene Kiniski. Could you notice anything else in this match? I mean, there was some blood and there was some good wrestling, but man, he just stuck out.
So what this match felt like, it occurred to me halfway through, and the longer it went, the more I realized I thought this was accurate. This felt like a 5-round UFC heavyweight fight.
Yes, this was a World Championship professional wrestling title match.
Yeah.
And it felt like that.
It wasn't the fastest thing you ever saw.
Hell no, it wasn't.
Start to finish, in fact, it was really slow. Methodical would be a nice way to say it.
Yeah.
But it was intense because these guys, neither guy wanted to blow himself up. Both guys knew this was going to be a long fight. They were ready for deep water. And neither guy wanted to be the one to make a mistake that his opponent could exploit and finish him off. Because it's not like football where if you fall behind, you can come back at the end. In wrestling, or UFC...
No, this is not like football, because as it was noted to us, football, there's 14 minutes of action, human-to-human contact in a game.
That's what they said, yes.
And man, if a match goes 60 minutes, that's like working 4 football games with no timeouts and no breaks.
That's right.
Gordon Solie was on fire on this.
He got off to a slow start in this show. He was great in the main event.
He turned it up for the main event there. Now, Harley was only 40 years old here. I couldn't even believe it when I looked that up. I thought, this guy's got to be like in his mid-50s. He's still hanging on. He's fighting Ric Flair here in 83. And I'm like, Harley's still alive. There's no way he could be 53.
Yeah.
I looked it up. He's 40. I was like, you're the oldest 40-year-old I've ever seen. Like, Vitor Belfort looks at Harley Race and goes, God damn, dude, you've had a rough life. He's out there. He's fat. And, of course, God bless Harley. But let's be honest here. He was not Rick Rude. He was an old guy. He was kind of fat. But you know what? He carried himself like a tough guy.
Yes.
He came across like a tough guy, and he was a tough guy. And even though he didn't look like a bodybuilder, he made you believe, I can beat your ass.
Oh, he'd whip the hell out of me.
And he put a very, very believable beating on Ric Flair.
Mm-hmm. So we had a very, very long headlock with many near falls, a very, very long face lock with many near falls, and then Harley just hit a suplex and took over. And he beat him up for a good solid 10 minutes here. A couple of hope spots here and there. I noticed here, and I noticed it in the tag title match in the other show, whenever anyone in the 1980s wanted to give the other guy offense, to cut themselves off basically, it's time to miss an elbow drop. And
there was
boy,
a lot of
when it was time to miss an elbow drop, you've never seen guys lift their arms higher or hit the mat any harder. Transitions meant something.
There was a spot where, first off, both guys bled all over the place. I think Race hit a falling headbutt and Flair gigged, and I think Harley got busted open from a knee, but there was a big spot in the middle where Harley is beating on Rick in the corner, and Gene Kiniski, this is against the rules.
Yes.
You've got to break in the corner. So he fucking grabs Harley and drags him out of the corner. At one point, he was pulling him by the hair.
Yeah.
And as he's pulling him away, Flair sucker punches Harley. And Gene Kiniski chewed Flair out for this flagrant disrespect of his authority and rule breaking. Mm-hmm. So then they go to the other corner, and this time Gene Kiniski pulls Flair out of the corner, and as he's pulling Flair out of the corner, Harley does a big-ass headbutt to Flair's head. Uh-huh. Gene Kiniski chews him out. But you know what? It was poetic justice that Harley got that errant headbutt in there.
Ric Flair was the babyface here, but he did hit the cheap shot first.
Yes, he did.
And when you say Kiniski's pulling him off, and you mentioned grabbing Race by the hair one time, he gets behind these guys, and he does an overhook of both arms and grabs them back. How could you not hit a guy if you're in a world championship match and you have a free shot like that? I'd hit him. So they're wrestling for a while. And even when Harley takes over, he's using wrestling moves. Maybe a little rough stuff, a knee drop or an elbow here and there, but it's all wrestling. And the longer it goes, and the more it's not working, and the more Flair's still fighting back, it's time to up the violence. And Flair goes into the cage, and he gigs everywhere, and there's blood everywhere. So Flair really makes a comeback, a sustained comeback, and it was notable because the pace didn't change one bit. It's just now the babyface guy was winning on him. So he's still hitting chops and circling the ring and kicks the leg a few times and puts on the figure four. Race escapes the figure four, but he's now, they're both exhausted, and B, now Race's leg is in trouble, and every time he tries to lift Flair, Flair falls on top of him. So the match goes on a bit. Flair is just on fumes. He's on his knees. You could say he's throwing punches to the belly, but he's just slapping him, and it's not doing anything, and everyone knows it. This man's in trouble. And the announcers, by the way, and this is where, when they started talking about this, is where the UFC comparison really came in. They're pointing out, Race has had Flair in dire straits for some time now and has not put him away. He's going to pay for that eventually. Word. So they keep going and they keep going. And Race grabs a headlock.
Before that,
okay,
Flair gets the guy in the figure four, and they have an overhead camera.
Yes.
Which they claim was 70 feet above the ring.
Probably exaggerated.
I think that's a little exaggerated. But they are shooting straight down. I mean, straight down. There's no angle.
It's cool looking.
It's a square on a square screen.
Yes.
Because they didn't have a widescreen back then. So there's all you can see filling up the entire screen is the ring from above. So they're filming down, and Ric Flair. Let's think about this for a second. The Nature Boy Ric Flair has got Harley Race in the figure 4 leg lock. They're both bleeding like crazy. And they're on a blue mat, and the words NWA are on the mat. There's no fancy logo.
No.
It's like somebody went and got some yellow duct tape and wrote NWA on the mat.
10 lines. Is all this
It
took.
was so iconic, this shot.
Yeah.
It was like amazing. It was history right there. That was the coolest thing I've seen all weekend, was that overhead shot right there.
So Race grabs...
The only thing missing, I might add, one thing. Let me tell you something, everybody. I don't give a shit if you watch New Japan or not, but when you watch wrestling, you always look at it and you think, is there anything I can learn from this? Is there anything cool here that it would be neat if other promotions stole? I'm going to give you all something right now that could be stolen. In all of the big IWGP Championship matches, there is always a moment where the two guys are fighting, and there's usually like a double down, some big move, and both guys are down, and the fucking crowd is just going out of their minds, and they're screaming, and the dome is shaking or whatever. And right then, because both guys are down and it doesn't matter, the camera, it's not a fade, it's a blend, whatever they call it. It blends from the ring
Oh, yeah.
to a shot of the IWGP Heavyweight Championship belt. And they show what these fucking guys are killing themselves for. That's what this moment is all about, is what this shot is saying. And then it bleeds or blends back into the two guys laying there again. It's the best shot. They don't do this in WWE. I don't think they do in TNA. I've been watching, but it's so awesome. Everybody should steal this. And if they would have shown that in the middle of the figure 4 leg lock, just to blend away to that NWA World Championship belt, the old one, and then right back to the ring, that would have been the greatest moment in history. It was great.
So Race grabs a headlock. Flair goes to push him off. And the idea is that Race will go forward and accidentally bonk into Kiniski. What actually happened is Race blatantly threw his head forward and headbutted Kiniski. I'm pretty sure it was supposed to look like an accident.
It was awesome.
It did not.
It was awesome. But then Ric Flair goes up top. The referee's down. He does a high cross, and they both fall on their ass. And then Kiniski wakes
Flair
up.
fell on his face.
And he counts the pin, and Harley just lays there for 3 seconds. Like, through 2017 eyes, this was the most anticlimactic finish you've ever seen.
Yes. Well, first of all, the idea was that on the body press, Race would trip backwards over Kiniski. But I don't know whose fault it was, but they were all out of position. And so, like, the ref's over here, and Race is in the middle, and Flair is falling on his face over there. And then Flair's on top, and now Gene must recover. He has to look around, look to his left, look to his right, and then turn around and crawl over and count pin. Race is pinned for like an 8 count here. It was very anticlimactic. But it got the job done.
Sure did.
Ric Flair, the world champion for the... Was this the second time? Second or third? Third time. And like I say, I really enjoyed this match.
I got more to say.
All right.
The match is over.
Oh, yeah.
And they give Flair the title. He's covered in blood. Just caked in blood. And he raises the title above his head. And he's celebrating he's the new champion. And Harley Race, the beaten champion, who, I guess in theory, got screwed by Gene Kiniski, goddamn laying in the way. Harley Race is leaving the ring, and Kiniski's right there in the corner next to him. And if this were wrestling today, Harley would be like screaming and yelling, and maybe he'd shove Gene Kiniski, and they'd have dudes in there to break it up, and it'd be a wild scene. Harley Race stands there, right by the door. Gene Kiniski is right in front of him. And Harley Race, as calmly as possible, looks at Gene Kiniski, and he raises his hand, and he extends his index finger, and he waves it, wags it.
Either one.
He spins it back and forth as if to say, you're fucked, my friend. Or something. I don't know what he was telling the guy. But I was like, that was so effective. He didn't have to scream. He just had to wiggle his finger as if he had made the biggest mistake of his life. And then he left.
So, last thing I was going to say about the match itself is, I don't know if your average 2017 wrestling fan would enjoy this at all. I suspect many of them would actually be very bored. My curiosity has me asking fans, if you've never seen anything from this era, to go watch it and tell me what you think. I would like to know. Like I say, I think many of you won't understand why it's so great. And that's fine. It's not a knock on you. I'm just curious to see what people think of this, because it is so different than 99.9% of what you would see today. So all the baby faces come out. By the way, it took them an hour to get the cage set up. It came down in about a minute and a half. All the baby faces are out there celebrating with him. Angelo Mosca holds him up on his shoulders. He's saluting the fans with his belt. His wife comes in to kiss his bloody face and then go wipe herself off. And a few minutes go by and he shakes hands with everyone and they finally get him a mic. And it's a wide shot and there's just this mass of people in the ring. And you can't really see where he is. But then you just hear Flair's voice say, Jesus. He begins to talk. He's on the verge of tears. Says this is the greatest night of his life. He couldn't have done it without the fans. Thank them for all the help and support. And the announcers talk for a while, and they go back to the locker room where Schiavone's there to interview Flair again. It's been now a good 5 minutes, probably closer to 10 since the match has ended. Ric Flair is still caked in blood.
Not caked. He's leaking blood.
Yeah.
It's not dry blood.
No.
He's leaking blood everywhere.
Were there no towels in North Carolina in 1983?
You thanked Tony. You thanked Rufus, which made me laugh. Steamboat comes up, congratulates him, says, Flair, you owe me one. And by one, I'm pretty sure he was talking about a new suit, because Steamboat decided now was a great time to wear white and beige. He's fucking covered in blood. And then Dusty Rhodes, who's done 4 promos on this show. And granted, it wasn't his fault. They had technical difficulties. But still, he'd done 4 promos talking about how he was next in line for the title. Ric Flair's just won this. He's covered in blood. It's the greatest day of his life. Dusty shows up to tell him, that title's coming to me. It's like, that's nice, Dusty.
Dusty was the heel here.
And then a bunch of geeks came in and poured alcohol over Ric Flair in his cut.
Yeah. Let's wash your blood off with this champagne.
Oh, my God.
That was great.
It was awesome.
Second half of the show was really good.
First half was forgettable.
No, it was
awesome.
tragically bad.
I don't know about that.
There was a lot of bad stuff in the first half of this show.
That's Starrcade, everybody, and that is the show.